It is my great honor to introduce today's speaker, U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Jerome Adams. Appointed as the 20th United States Surgeon General in 2017, Dr. Adams serves to protect and advance our nation's health and safety. A board-certified anesthesiologist, Dr. Adams served as Indiana's State Health Commissioner from 2014 to 2017. Dr. Adams has a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and psychology from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, a Master of Public Health degree from the University of California at Berkeley, and a medical degree from Indiana University School of Medicine. As Health Commissioner, Dr. Adams presided over Indiana's efforts to deal with the state's unprecedented HIV outbreak caused by the sharing of needles among those who inject drugs. In this capacity, he worked directly with the CDC, as well as with state and local health officials and community leaders, and brought the widest range of resources, policies, and care available to stem the epidemic affecting those communities. Dr. Adams' motto as Surgeon General is better health through better partnerships. And as Surgeon General, he is committed to maintaining strong relationships within the public health community and forging new partnerships with non-traditional partners. Also, as Surgeon General, Dr. Adams oversees the operations of the U.S. Public Health Service Commissioned Corps, which has approximately 6,700 uniformed health officers who serve to promote, protect, and advance the health and safety of our nation. Please join me in welcoming back to Indiana Dr. Jerome Adams to speak to us today.
Wow, well, good evening, everyone, or good afternoon. Gosh, this is my fourth, I think, event, so it feels like evening. But it's also great to be back here amongst friends and amongst family. And you all really are friends and family to me. There are people in the audience whose weddings I've attended. There's people in the audience whose kids I've coached in soccer. There's people in the audience who were mentors and teachers for me throughout my career, and also people for whom I've been their mentor and their teacher. So I really want you all to know how special it is to be up here and to be able to look out and to see all of you. And I'm just happy to share a few words with you before Allison and I have a conversation and we take some of your questions. And by the way, Allison, thank you for the kind introduction. And I'd love to come out to the Motor Speedway. The last time I was there was when I ran the mini marathon, which I've run several times. And love that race, and I'm going to be training, hopefully, for it because I'm coming back from an Achilles injury. Funny story. So Heather, where are you? Heather's in the back. So at her wedding, I actually had hurt my Achilles and had a procedure on it and was wearing a boot. And so everyone remembers me in the wedding because I'm doing the electric slide with this boot on me from my Achilles injury. But I'm back in action, and I'm going to be running the mini marathon if all goes well. But for those of you in the audience who may be unfamiliar with what the U.S. Surgeon General actually does, I usually start by debunking a few myths. And I've got to say thank you again, Allison, for not introducing me as the Attorney General. Because that guy's in the news way too much for me right now, and I don't want the questions that you would be asking of him, and you certainly don't want me giving you any legal advice. I also am not an airline pilot, though I frequently get mistaken for one. And this is a true story, so much to the point that I know where the peanuts and the headphones are on the plane, because it is easier to just grab them for someone than what it is to try to explain to them who I actually am and what I do. And finally, I'm actually neither a surgeon nor a general. I am an anesthesiologist, and I still do practice about a day a month at Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington, D.C. I tell folks in the audience this, but particularly the earlier career folks, I'm often surprised, both at the state level and at the national level, how often decisions are made about the way healthcare is going to be delivered without input from anyone who actually has touched a patient in the last 10, 20 years. So it's important to me to get into the operating room, to get into the clinic, to put hands on patients, to get that feedback from my colleagues, and I try to do it whenever I can. So, anesthesiologist, even though I hope I don't put you to sleep today. Also, not a general, but a vice admiral in the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, 6,500 full-time officers, doctors, nurses, dentists, veterinarians, environmental health officers, dietitians, who are committed to advancing, protecting, and promoting America's health. And just as I came into my role as Indiana State Health Commissioner, and on day one had to stand next to then Governor Pence and try to explain to Hoosiers what Ebola was and how we were going to respond. On day one of my job as Surgeon General, the second of 3 Category 5 hurricanes were barreling down on the southern United States and Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And so I had to deploy to that area. And that's some of what our officers do: wildfires, earthquakes, natural and man-made disasters. And so I stand before you proud to wear this uniform and to be head of the Public Health Service Commission Corps. But the most visible role of the Surgeon General is the nation's doctor role, the guy on the side of the pack of cigarettes. And I have been asked to sign people's cigarette boxes. I always put, I'll do it, but I always put, please stop smoking. I get asked more often to sign the side of wine bottles. I haven't put on there, please stop drinking. I probably should put on there, use in moderation. But in that role, I'm focused on promoting health, preventing disease, and leading with the science. And during my tenure, I am focused on 3 main areas. Number 1, addressing substance misuse, and in particular, the opioid epidemic. Many of you all know this. In 2017, CDC reported that overdoses set a new annual record, just over 70,000 lives taken. It's like filling up all of Lucas Oil Stadium, where I saw some of you yesterday at the Colts game, with people, and losing that many people to an opioid overdose. There's a person dying every 11 minutes in this country due to an opioid overdose. 2.1 million people struggle with this disorder. And people with opioid use disorder, they're our friends, our neighbors. Statistically speaking, some of you all here in the audience today, and as many of you know, my own brother Philip actually is incarcerated right now. He stole $200 to support his addiction and was given a 10-year prison sentence. And so addiction can happen to anyone, even the brother of the United States Surgeon General. And I get asked this question often, Surgeon General, well, what do you think is the biggest killer out there? Is it tobacco? Is it sugar-sweetened beverages? I'll often say that I think the biggest killer out there is stigma, because stigma keeps people in the shadows. It keeps people from admitting they have a problem. It keeps families from coming forward and sharing their problem. Justin, are you in here? Justin Phillips. Any of you all know Justin Phillips? So Justin lost her son Aaron to an opioid overdose. And she's used her family's loss to help raise awareness about naloxone. But I mentioned Justin because I was talking about stigma, and Justin said something a long time ago that always stuck with me. She said, when someone has cancer, we bring them casseroles. When someone has substance use disorder, we whisper about them. We don't talk about them. We don't bring them casseroles. We don't provide them support. And we're not going to turn around this opioid epidemic specifically, or substance use disorder in general, if we don't start recognizing addiction for what it is, a chronic brain disease for which there are effective treatments available. So what are we doing to address the opioid epidemic? Well, number 1, we're working to prevent addiction before it starts. And as an example, we're working with healthcare providers to improve safe prescribing practices and increase alternatives to opioids. And we're also working to educate the public about the severity of the epidemic. A lot of folks recognize there's an opioid problem, but they don't think it's happening in their communities. Yes, it is happening in Fishers. Yes, it is happening in Carmel. Yes, it is happening in Westfield. It's happening in your schools, it's happening in your families, and we need folks to understand that it's touching all of us and that we need to destigmatize addiction. So I want to share this with you because I took a 21st century slant to educating the public about the opioid epidemic by issuing a digital postcard. You can go to surgeongeneral.gov and view this, but it lists 5 tangible actions that all of you can take to help respond to the opioid epidemic, to raise awareness, to prevent addiction, and to stop overdose deaths. So please take a snapshot of that. Again, we're on Twitter right now. I am at Jerome Adams, MD, is my personal Twitter, and my official Twitter is at Surgeon_General. But this digital postcard only works if you guys share it. So please share it, and we can talk about it during the Q&A if you have questions about it. The third thing my office is focused on is putting the naloxone in the hands of first responders and community members. Quick question for you guys. Raise your hand if you know CPR. Look at how many hands are up. Raise your hand if you carry naloxone with you everywhere you go. Anybody notice the difference? The fact is, it's more likely you're going to be called upon when you leave this convention center to respond to someone who's having an opioid overdose in downtown Indianapolis than what it is that someone's going to ask you to come and administer CPR. And until we make naloxone as ubiquitous as CPR, we're not truly going to achieve our potential in terms of reversing opioid overdoses. Almost half of opioid overdoses are witnessed. Less than 4% of opioid overdoses actually get administered naloxone. And it's why I issued the first Surgeon General's advisory in 13 years, calling on more people to know about and be willing to carry naloxone. Not just first responders, even though we still don't have all of our first responders carrying naloxone, but all of you, because half of opioid overdoses are occurring in a home environment, in a bathroom, in a bedroom, in a garage, in a dorm room. I met a young lady last week whose son passed away of an opioid overdose on his 4th day of school, his 4th day of college. So we need you all to be willing to carry naloxone yourselves and to educate other folks. 2 take-home versions of naloxone. They're going to make me stay behind them. Okay, there we go. 2 take-home versions of naloxone. One is the intranasal version. The other is an auto-injector version. The auto-injector version talks to you.
This tray to inject. Please.
That easy to use.
3, 2.
The other version is an intranasal version, and you actually just put it in the nostril and press. That's how easy it is to save a life. Any of you can do it. It's easier than your CPR course. And so I want to talk about something else, another epidemic that's impacting our communities right now, the e-cigarette epidemic. And I hope many of you are aware that last December, my office released an advisory officially alerting the public to a 78% increase in e-cigarette use among our young people. For the last 2 decades, we've seen tobacco use among young people going down. It's now going back up because of e-cigarettes and vaping. We are literally creating a new generation of people who are addicted to nicotine and going to be the future customers of the tobacco industry, which is exactly what they want. And we now have over 2,000 cases of vaping-related lung injury in the United States, including 42 deaths. Most, but not all of these cases involve vaping of THC. You know, as I say to folks often, God didn't mean for anything to go into your lungs but air. You start putting other stuff in there, bad things are likely to happen, whether it's marijuana or whether it's whatever comes in that pod that Joel is giving you. And so I think it's important that we all understand and do what we can to raise awareness about the e-cigarette epidemic to protect our youth. And I spoke about marijuana. As many of you may know, I recently released a Surgeon General's advisory on marijuana use in the developing brain. It underscores an important message that no amount of marijuana usage during pregnancy or adolescence is known to be safe. Unfortunately, marijuana is the #1 most commonly used illicit drug among pregnant women, the #3 most commonly used illicit drug amongst our young people. 33 states in the District of Columbia have legalized marijuana in some shape or form. And we can have a discussion about adult recreational use. We can have a discussion about medical use, but we should all be able to agree no young person, no pregnant woman should be using marijuana, period, point blank. But for some reason, when I said that, I get death threats on Twitter. I get people calling, comparing me to Hitler. and saying that I'm a traitor to this country. Well, the fact is, if sticking up for young people and our future generations makes me a traitor, then that's just what you're going to have to call me. But I'm going to continue to fight for our youth. I'm going to continue to fight for the developing fetus that's inside a woman's belly and that shouldn't be exposed to toxic substances, and I hope you all will join me. Thank you for that. It really does mean a lot to me. And, on a little bit of a lighter note, I tell folks, if you want a good time on a Friday night, get yourself a glass of wine and follow my Twitter feed when the vape advocates and the marijuana folks come after me. Because, boy, do they give me the business. And again, my only position has been young people should not be using these products. And for some reason, that gets people riled up. But my second priority is raising awareness of the link between our nation's health and its safety and national security. A quick did you know? Did you know 7 out of 10 of our 18 to 24-year-olds in this country, 7 out of 10, 70% are ineligible for military service right now because they can't pass the physical, can't meet the educational requirements, or have a criminal background record. Some of our eligible youth suffer from nicotine dependence and obesity-related diseases that disqualify them. They want to serve, but their poor health just won't let them. Our current military members are suffering, not only from tobacco use, but from poor oral health. And it's not just a matter of health outcomes down the road. We are literally a less safe country because we're an unhealthy country. And so I've been working with the Surgeons General of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force to find out ways that we can lift up community health as a function of our national security. And there's actually some strategy behind this, too. I said to folks earlier at a different meeting, you know what folks vote on? Number 2 issue that people vote on, Democrat or Republican, black or white, rural or urban, is safety and security. You know what they don't vote on? They don't vote on health. They don't vote on health. So we have to help folks understand that by supporting the health of communities, we're supporting our national security. And the other interesting thing is that when the Department of Defense goes to Congress and says, I need $20 billion for a new fighter jet, no one bats an eye. But when we go to Congress and say, we want nickels and dimes to fight HIV, or to lower infant mortality rates, or to address smoking, everyone goes, are you sure? You really need that? Is that really what the taxpayers would want us to spend our money on? And so it's really important to me that we understand our audience and that we speak to them in ways that resonate, and we help them understand we are a less safe country because we're an unhealthy country. And that leads me to my third focus area, actually the number 1 issue that people vote on, and that's jobs and the economy. So my Community Health and Economic Prosperity Initiative, I'm struggling with these slides, you all. I usually don't talk with slides, so please forgive me. But my Community Health and Economic Prosperity Initiative, it hopes to galvanize business investments in community health, recognizing that as communities prosper, so do businesses. CHEP, as I like to call it, Community Health and Economic Prosperity, is about engaging businesses, implementing solutions, and strengthening communities so that everyone benefits. Because you can't have thriving businesses without healthy people and healthy communities. I talked about the opioid epidemic earlier. I travel all over the country talking about what I view as a health issue and a health epidemic. I've traveled with the head of the Department of Labor. You know how they view the opioid epidemic? They view it as a workforce problem. There are now more unfilled jobs than there are people looking for work in this country. So we need to help, again, reframe this issue. And when you're a physician like I am, and when you work in public health, you can't help but notice 2 stunning and paradoxical trends. First, health in this country is actually getting worse, as measured by life expectancy, and especially in the working age population. For the 3rd year in a row, life expectancy is going down, and I stand before you as the first generation of parents who can't look their kids in the eye and say you're going to live a longer life than your mother or your father will. That's just a terrible statement. And at the same time, the other thing that strikes me is that we pay more for medical care than any other country and continue to get terrible outcomes. And this translates into businesses saddled with high and growing healthcare costs for their employees and their employees' families. This is also noteworthy. Over half of the covered lives for most employers aren't the employee. They're the spouse and the dependents. And employers often struggle to fill positions, to reach productivity goals, and to attract and retain the best talent. Unemployment is at an all-time low right now, but so too is workforce participation. Too many Americans have opted out due to chronic disease, due to substance misuse and addiction, due to taking care of family members who may have a disability or a chronic physical or mental health condition. And that's ultimately the connection that I'm trying to make, that Americans are not as healthy as we could be, and that it's not just a matter of poor health, that it's not good for business when America is unhealthy. So if someone is obese or smokes or is prone to violence, where do communities actually fit in? Aren't those personal problems? Aren't those things that are created by personal decisions? Well, communities are where health actually happens. When we think of health, far too often we tend to think of health care. But health care alone can't solve the health problem because 80 to 90% of our health happens outside the clinic, outside the hospital. The fact is, health, in a broader sense, is shaped by 5 domains: social and economic factors, physical and social environments, individual behaviors, public policies, and about 10 to 15% of it is made up of health care. The first 3 that I mentioned, social and economic factors like education and jobs, physical and social environments like safety, green spaces and grocery stores, and individual behaviors like physical activity and good nutrition and tobacco avoidance, all happen in communities. They all are created by the choice architecture that exists in our towns and in our counties and in our cities. State and local policies like smoke-free air laws, like minimum wage laws, like tobacco taxes, and policies that support early child development influence the quality of the communities in which we live and how communities shape health. So health does happen in communities, and if we want healthy people actively participating in the workforce and achieving their potential, we need to zero in on the problems that are holding our communities back and our people back. So what's the business imperative here? Well, businesses exist in communities too. In most businesses, bail bondsmen and payday lenders are, the exception, but most businesses do better when community members, from employees to consumers to suppliers, are all healthy and prosperous. If you're trying to sell a widget, not as many people are going to buy your widget if they're spending all their money buying heroin. It's not just your employees, it's your consumers and the whole supply chain. And businesses, you all make decisions in and for your communities. So let me share a few real-world examples of communities I visited as I wrap this up and get ready for questions. One great example that many of you hopefully have heard about is right here in Indiana, Belden Industries in Richmond, Indiana. Anyone heard of Belden? So for those that haven't, Belden is a technology company that I learned about before I left Indiana and then came back to visit with Second Lady Pence. During our visit, we were struck by Belden's innovative approach to solving a community-wide problem, substance use disorders. They had to interview well over 200 people to fill about 20 job positions because everyone else was failing the drug test. And in Belden's case, the technology company implemented a novel solution which has the potential to transform the town of Richmond and is also transforming the way we look at workforce and creating healthy and recovery-friendly communities all across the nation. They launched a unique pilot project called Pathways to Employment. Every applicant who fails the initial drug screen is offered treatment and supported through treatment. And if they complete treatment, Belden will save a job for them. And the company continues to support these employees' recovery. It ends up being a win for the company, for the employee, and for the community of Richmond, Indiana. They found that people who complete the program are among the most loyal employees. They actually miss fewer days from work than people who actually don't have a substance use disorder. And again, it is a true win-win. Another example is Opportunity Youth. Did you know that 1 in 9 people aged 16 to 24 are disconnected from education and employment? These young people, some people call them disconnected youth. I call them opportunity youth. But they can develop a host of problems that society, that all of you then have to deal with. From an excess of chronic diseases and mental health issues to incarceration, unemployment, homelessness, and difficulty thriving and reaching their full potential. The full lifetime fiscal burden of youth who are disconnected from education and employment is $1.6 trillion. So let me tell you about 2 businesses that are looking at these opportunity youth differently, Hyatt and Bank of America. Both companies, as do many of yours, have jobs that don't require a college degree or even a high school diploma, though it's important to note that half of disconnected youth have actually graduated through high school. One of the things that they did was first look at all their jobs and say, are we unfairly screening people out by having requirements that people really don't need? Do you need a liberal arts degree to be able to come into a place and learn a specific skill set that can contribute to you being a productive employee? It's a question you all need to ask yourselves, especially as we're dealing with an employment crisis. But working with local, regional, and national nonprofits like Grads of Life, they're hiring thousands of opportunity youth, providing training and mentoring and creating career ladders. The companies found that opportunity youth are terrific employees. They're invested in the companies, and they're more likely to stay with the company. They offer great savings on typical recruitment costs to fill entry-level or higher positions. And I talk about staying with the company. I actually met with CVS last week. CVS told me if they lose a pharmacy tech within the first 6 months, it costs them $3,700 to go out and recruit someone else and train a new person. $3,700. How about if you use $2,000 of that $3,700 to invest in pipeline programs and to help people get the skill sets that they need to continue to stay employed and to be a loyal employee? You still save $1,700. But again, you've got to have the courage to think about doing things differently. Recognizing the talent and potential that these young people bring, Hyatt and Bank of America have made a solid business investment in youth. These young people actually bring a new perspective. They've helped Hyatt and Bank of America figure out how to recruit more young people because they think like young people. When you give people a chance to contribute to society, especially when they otherwise might become a burden on society, you make a positive impact on income inequality, and you help attenuate the lack of economic opportunity in our country and in our communities. You create a healthier, more vibrant future for everybody. There are other examples, including a bakery that I visited in New York City. This bakery, they actually accept people who've been formerly incarcerated or who are in recovery. And they don't have a job application. They don't do a background check. Their motto is, we don't hire people to bake brownies, we bake brownies to hire people. And we need more of you all to have that mindset out there because it's good for your company in the long term and your communities in the long term. These companies, again, are making decisions that lift up people and communities to the benefit of their businesses. There's a little bit of this in there, but there's a whole lot of this and a whole lot of this that leads to them making these decisions. And as you think about these examples, I encourage you to keep in mind the different forms that value and return on investment can make when you invest in communities and in youth. Investing in communities and investing in the policies and practices that promote health and prosperity can deliver a healthier population and lower healthcare costs, which is the number 2 expense for most of your companies. It can deliver healthier workers who are more productive, more present while they're at work, less likely to miss work, and are more loyal to your institution. It can improve a company's image and desirability as consumers approve of businesses' values and principles and choose those products and services. If I can buy a croissant or a brownie from someone who's supporting people who were formerly incarcerated, or I can go to another company that's just going to overcharge me for it and has no value statement, who am I going to go to? And value can just be plain old money. If a business wants to invest in a venture to build low or mixed income housing, for example, that can return a value of profit. So you and your businesses and communities are key to my CHEP initiative, And I want to finish by asking you to do a couple of things. Number one, consider a more expansive definition of value and return on investment. For instance, how does increasing the cigarette tax in our state not just translate into less lung cancer and lower cardiovascular disease rates, but how does it translate into job and wage growth at a local level? How do you make the argument to legislators and to policymakers that, hey, healthcare is our number 2 expense? And if we're spending increasing amounts of money to pay for tobacco-related illnesses, that's money that's not going to create new jobs. That's money that's not going to raise the wage at which we can offer to our employees. Think about your own businesses. What can you source locally? What can you do to hire locally? And we often like to think about ways that we can attract people to come to our communities and our businesses, but do a survey of your local community and figure out who's already there that you can train up to get into your pipeline and ultimately become your employee. They're going to be a much more loyal and ultimately valuable employee to you than someone who you recruited from out of town and paid a huge bonus to move into town for, and then stays there for a year or two and then leaves. They're not invested in your community. How can you invest in other local businesses and suppliers and create pathways to employment in partnership with your local education entities? Another specific thing you can do is talk to your local health department. Have them come in and just share with you what the burden of disease is in your community, what things are affecting you. I love going around and talking to Rotary clubs and talking to local chambers of commerce and seeing their eyes get wide when you tell them how high their overdose rates actually are, or when you tell them what their infant mortality rates actually are, because everyone thinks they're doing better than what they are. You know, 80% of the public, 80% of you all in the audience think you're an above average driver. I'll let that sink in for a minute. Until we can objectively show people what they're suffering from, they won't believe there's a problem, and they won't then be willing to take the initiative to fix that problem. Think about the health implications of every step you take. How do your corporate policies, practices, and investments impact the health of your employees and your community? Are you looking at the shift work that you're doing and burning people out, increasing churn? Do you know where the people in your community live? Do they have affordable and safe housing to go home to? Or are they going home to mold and smoke-filled places that are going to increase their chance of missing work? How might your company increase opportunities for health and healthy behavior? And this one's really important to me. You've got to think beyond worksite wellness programs. Worksite wellness programs are important, but again, over half of your covered lives aren't your actual employees. And even when they are, you can do everything right from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., but if you're sending them back home to an unhealthy environment from 4 p.m. till 8 a.m. the next day, it's going to undo a lot of the progress you've made. So by all means, work on those salad bars and making the stairs more accessible and increasing healthy options for people and vending machines on your work sites. But also think about what options those people have when they leave your work site and what options their families have. And that leads to one of my final points. It's critical that you think beyond healthcare and understand the needs and challenges of your employees and their families within the communities in which they live, learn, work, play, and pray. What's the status of quality, affordable housing, early child care, education, green spaces, and walkability? What can you and your businesses do to make improvements in the community? Advocate for community health and employee health when legislation is being considered. And this is on a county level, on a state level, on a federal level. Weigh in on the impacts to health and to the prosperity of your businesses. Help them understand that it really does matter to your bottom line when your community is unhealthy. And share my digital postcard on opioids, promote naloxone, and visit surgeongeneral.gov to learn more about e-cigarettes, marijuana risk, and the other health issues affecting your community's health and your economic prosperity. So go and build strong, resilient communities and think about health in everything that you do. Because again, it matters here, it matters here, and it matters here. So thanks for the opportunity. And Allison, you ready to take some questions?
Yes. Yes,
All
sir.
right, thank you, everyone.
Okay, great job. Thank you so much. Reminder to send up the questions so we can have good, engaging questions come forward. First, I want to thank you for the stand that you've taken on on all the policies, and you're such a passionate advocate for our health, the country's health, and there's so many great things all of us can take from that. So send up your questions. 2 years you've been in the job.
Yes.
What do you think your single biggest impact is so far?
Oh, that one's actually pretty easy. And we were having this conversation earlier. Every year there's folks, for various reasons, who question whether or not we even need to have a Surgeon General. Why are we spending tax money on a Surgeon General? Well, I'll very quickly walk you through my career. I was an anesthesiologist, and that was my sole profession for about 10 years. And I worked at a level 1 trauma center at Wishard, Eskenazi. And in that role, I literally saved lives. I mean, people came in, a motor vehicle accident, gunshot wounds, they would have been dead if we hadn't been there to take care of them. So let's say I saved 50 lives a year. Over 10 years, 500 lives. Well, last year we put out our advisory on naloxone, and after we put out that advisory, naloxone dispensing went up by 400% nationwide, over 2 million units of naloxone administered, simply by using my voice, by using the bully pulpit, by advocating. I saved exponentially more lives, thousands of lives, than I ever did in 10 years of clinical practice. And that's not to diminish the importance of clinical practice. It's to help you understand there's a spectrum. We need people to catch folks in safety nets when they fall off cliffs, but we also need to start to move upstream. We need to build fences so people don't fall off those cliffs in the first place. We need to use advocacy to try to increase our reach beyond that individual patient encounter. And I am very proud of again, making naloxone more available. I also want to give some kudos to folks in the audience, because another thing I'm proud of, and this is one of the things I'm most proud of, and this happened before I became Surgeon General. And this has to do with Scott County, Indiana. Thanks to the work of Dr. Joan Duvey, of Justin Phillips, of Dr. Jennifer Walthall, of the folks from IU and Eskenazi, of Jenny Kane, who has had my back for longer than I can remember. We were able to get a syringe service program approved here in the state of Indiana. And that's worth applauding. And it not only saved lives in Indiana, but Kentucky went from 0 to 50 syringe service programs based on what we did. There are places all over the United States who've now embraced harm reduction because of the work of the people in this room and the people in this state to advance syringe service programs. Yes, we have over 200 people with HIV in Scott County, Indiana, and it is a terrible, terrible tragedy. But in a strange way, we may have saved thousands of lives because of how we responded. And so I'm very proud of all of you all. I get way too much credit for it, and the folks in the state don't get nearly enough, but really proud of all of you all for your efforts to advance syringe service programs and harm reduction and get one of the highest viral suppression rates in the country in Scott County.
Okay, great question following right up on that. Where does a layperson find naloxone? Where do you get it? And how much does it cost?
That's a great question. So you can go into your local pharmacy and through a standing order that's signed by the state health commissioner. Is Dr. Box here? Dr. Box isn't here, but she has a standing order that allows anyone to go in any pharmacy in the state and get naloxone. If you have insurance, 95% of insurance will cover for you to get naloxone. If you don't have insurance, call your local health department. The state of Indiana has done a fantastic job of making naloxone available to state and local, or to local health departments to be able to distribute, particularly in areas that are that are at risk. And if you really need naloxone, call Justin. Right, Justin? Because Justin has done more than anyone in this state as an individual to make naloxone available. She really helped promote naloxone before anyone in the country or the state really recognized that we had an opioid epidemic. And so we've really, on a federal level, tried to promote insurers to cover naloxone, provided funding through SAMHSA and CDC to get out to state and local health departments to fund naloxone. And then there's nonprofits, again, such as Overdose Lifeline, who are working to make it more available.
Let's give Justin a quick round of applause for her advocacy for that. Thank you.
And just a quick follow-up to that. One of the questions I get asked all the time is, are you having fun? Are you enjoying yourself? Every morning I wake up, I feel blessed to be in this role. I feel excited to go to work. But the honest truth is, every time I give a talk, someone comes up to me afterwards and shares the picture of their loved one who's died from an opioid overdose. That part of it is not fun. That part of it is not enjoyable. But I got to tell you, what does lift my heart is meeting people like Justin over and over and over again around the country who've used their tragedy and turned it into education and destigmatization and moved the conversation forward in regards to the opioid epidemic. And so please continue to support people as they share their stories and continue to support people as we destigmatize addiction.
Okay, next question. Mention that you are the first Surgeon General to be trained in public health. Is that can you just clarify that?
So I got my master's in public health at Berkeley, and I, again, was pushed by Dr. Kane to get that degree. Back when she was head of the American Public Health Association. And so, yes, as far as anyone can tell, I'm the first Surgeon General to actually have formal training in public health, and I'm the second Surgeon General to actually have run a State Department of Health, at least in recent history. The other one was Dr. Jocelyn Elders. So I got to tell you my Jocelyn Elders joke. I was on a panel with Jocelyn Elders, and they asked her, what advice would you give Dr. Adams as he embarks on his journey as Surgeon General? And some of you know Dr. Elders, and you'll get this right away. Others, maybe not. But Dr. Elders, who is now pushing 90, says, I wouldn't tell him a damn thing. I got fired. Don't you all remember that? And Dr. Elders has the distinction of being the only Surgeon General portrayed on Saturday Night Live because she got fired for talking about sexual health and sexual education. And SNL, you can actually look it up on YouTube, actually did a little skit about her afterwards.
Lots of questions about vaping are coming up, which is a bit of a complicated topic right now. What do you do when medical, in your situation, it's very challenging when medical evidence is presenting certain results and that policymakers aren't following along with that? You've got to balance that. How do you do that?
That is a great question. And one of the things I'll say is the key word in public policy and public health is public. And we've got to understand that as communities and as individuals, every decision we make is a multivariate equation. It's a dash of science, it's a skosh of religion, it's a touch of finance, it's a little bit of culture, and we mix it all up and we make decisions for ourselves. And we make decisions as communities. And we could talk about vaping, we could talk about vaccinations, we could talk about substance misuse, we could talk about any issue, and you're still not always going to have the science dictating the final policy, at least not in a way that we would like. But one thing I would say to you is the science doesn't even dictate the way you make decisions on a day-to-day basis. How many times in the last week have you, for the sake of your work, not gotten enough sleep, eaten an unhealthy meal, skipped a meal, missed time with your family? All these are things that we know to be healthy, but we prioritize other things in our life over them. And so my answer to your question is that we need to do a better job, and I say we, meaning the health community and people who care about health, of sitting down with an array of audiences, with the faith-based community, with the business community, with the public safety community, with the educational community, and finding out what motivates them. What are their priorities? So I'll give you a real example from Scott County. I drove down to Scott County and when we had the HIV outbreak, and that's an important first thing. I drove down to Scott County. I left the ivory tower of the State Department of Health in Indianapolis and drove 2 hours to southern Indiana. I met with the sheriff. We had a meal together, and I didn't tell him what I thought he should do. I said, "What are your concerns?" And the sheriff said, "Well, I'm concerned about all these needles in the streets, and I'm concerned about my overcrowded jail." And I said, "Well, you know, those are valid concerns, because it's important that you listen and that you validate folks." I said, "You know, if we work together, we can set up the syringe service program so we're getting people connected to treatment. And then that way they're not going back and forth in and out of your jail. And if we do this right, we'll encourage people to bring their needles in and exchange them instead of dumping them on the streets. And they won't be so scared of law enforcement that they just discard them wherever. And that'll help increase public safety. And by really engaging with the community, I think they tend to listen to you more. There's a saying, people need to know that you care before they care what you know. I don't think we do a good enough job of helping people understand that we truly care about them when we're crafting policy. And so therefore, they dismiss what we know. And that's vaping, again, that's vaccinations, that's whatever you could pick or choose. So I'm trying to get into communities, talk to parents, talk to educators, talk to kids, and find like-minded advocates. I'd rather have another 15-year-old talking to my 15-year-old than have the Surgeon General of the United States, because my kids could care less than I'm the Surgeon General of the United States. They get cut and they won't even trust me to put a Band-Aid on them. But they'll believe whatever they hear on YouTube or whatever one of their buddies actually says to them. So trying to find out how we can find those peers and again, get into those communities to deliver our health messages.
Yeah, one of the things at our table we talked a lot about at lunch was your unbelievable travel schedule and actually going to all these rural communities, talking to people, seeing it firsthand. And I'm sure that is a bigger impact, certainly, than the ivory tower.
Well, one of the things I love is going to communities. I was in North Dakota a few weeks ago, and the governor and his wife rolled out the red carpet, but they said, "You're the first Surgeon General who has ever been to North Dakota." That is crazy to me. There are people all across this country who don't feel like they have access to their decision makers and to their leaders. And that's something that I tried to turn around when I was in the State Department of Health role. I made it a point to get out and visit county health departments and to travel all over the state. And I've made it my goal to try to visit every state in the United States at least once every 2 years, because I think everyone deserves to see their Surgeon General. Everyone deserves to be able to give input to their decision makers. And you know, you learn a lot about folks when you get out of Washington, D.C. North Dakota's it's a different place. And but I mean, the people there are still good people, and they still just want what's best for their family. They just see things through a different lens than the folks in Boston, Massachusetts, where I was this weekend. And if you don't get out there and have a meal with folks, break bread, and spend time with them, then you won't appreciate that.
Right. We have a number of questions regarding suicide and the mental illness issues surrounding suicide, and wanting your thoughts on that.
Well, again, I talked about life expectancy going down. One of the reasons that life expectancy is going down is that more people are dying by suicide. So that is a fact. It is something that we're concerned about. It's something that the military is concerned about. There are 20 people who either were in the military or are in the military who die by suicide every single day. Every single day. And I'll take it to a broader area, and that's firearms.
We have a number of ones about that,
we
too.
talk about, there's a lot of debate about firearms and what we should do. But again, I think a lot of people don't realize the true breakdown of the burden of disease. There are 40,000 people who died by firearm injury last year. Of that 40,000, 85 died from active shooter incidents. 85 out of 40,000. About 60% of that 40,000 died by firearm-related suicide. Another big chunk of that were folks who died in interpersonal violence and homicide. And then there were folks who died by accidental firearm injury. But what I try to do is go into communities and really help them understand this is what's happening in your community. And then say, how can we work together to come up with some common sense solutions? Can we talk about safer gun ownership? Because whether you believe in firearm ownership or not, I think the biggest threat to people's Second Amendment rights is if more and more people continue to die by firearm. I think if you believe in Second Amendment rights and protecting those Second Amendment rights, then you absolutely need to believe in and promote safer gun ownership, and that includes trying to protect people who are at risk of taking their life by suicide. And so, big problem. I think not enough people recognize how close the problem is, because we talked about stigma. While stigma is related to substance use disorder, there's an even greater stigma attached to people who take their lives by suicide. And many of these overdose deaths, in many cases, are people who are, if we're going to be honest about it, taking their life by suicide. They're engaging, some of them, in a habit which they know is self-destructive, and they've lost all meaning, all reason to live. And we haven't done a good enough job of connecting with them. They're afraid to ask for help. Again, suicide is a big concern for me, and I'm trying to raise awareness about it. The president has the Prevents Task Force, which will be putting out recommendations in March, I believe. But that, again, is folks from the VA, folks from the military. I've been participating, and again, trying to raise awareness about the steps we all can take to identify folks at risk and to protect them from dying by suicide.
Okay, great. I think we have time for one more question. How do we help the public understand that ranking 48th of 50 in public health funding is a real challenge for Indiana?
Well, Paul, Dr. Halverson shared this earlier, and I've shared the same sentiment. I've gone around and talked about how little we spend on public health and health funding. And one of the challenges is, and it took a while for me to realize this, there were some people who think that's a good thing. That, hey, we're spending less money than anyone else. That's a good thing for our state, right? We need to help people understand, number one, that whenever anyone anywhere suffers from poor health, we all eventually and inevitably pay the price. So you can believe in personal responsibility, and I do. But number one, the choices people make are directly related to the choices that they have in front of them. And number two, when they make a bad choice, it ends up costing us. We have to incarcerate someone. We have to pay extra health care expenses for someone. We lose someone who could be participating in the workforce. We all pay the price. And that's what my CHEP report, again, is ultimately all about. It's about making the case to businesses that you have a stake in this, that it is your business to get involved in policymaking on a larger level, but also to look at the policies that you have within your company and determine how they're affecting health and communities. Example I'll give you is the opioid epidemic. I talk to CEOs all the time, and they say, what can we do to respond to the opioid epidemic? And then I get a deer in headlights look when I say, have you looked at your benefits? Why do you pay for 30 Vicodin, but you won't pay for physical therapy? Why aren't you paying for mental health services for people so that you can prevent them from feeling like they need to self-medicate in the first place? So there are real, tangible actions that businesses can take, and I call on all of you, when you leave here today, to think about both the micro things you can do, like going out and getting the naloxone, and the macro things that you can do, like advocating for policies that create healthier communities. And again, my job, what I'm going to do, is try to continue to translate health into economic outcomes and metrics, because we know that's what drives people and that's what they vote on. But we also know that ultimately investing in health will lead to more prosperity, more of a financial benefit for everyone.
Mm-hmm. I want to thank Dr. Adams for being here today. We are so grateful for you.
Thank you.
There we go, yeah. Thank you for your public service. We appreciate you. You're doing a great job. We're proud that you have come from our state and wish you the best going forward. And in the mini marathon, I will see you there.
Yes, and thank you all for supporting me and for supporting my family. I really, really mean that. There are a lot of you in this audience who've reached out to me from time to time personally when folks are trying to tear me down for doing the right thing. And there are a lot of you all who supported me through my nomination and confirmation process. And some of you in the audience know this. My wife, about a month after she moved out to Washington, D.C., actually was diagnosed with metastatic melanoma. And she's fortunately finished treatment and is cancer-free. Thank you. But the support, the prayers from many of you all from our Indiana community really meant a lot to her and to my family. And some of you all actually provided monetary support, food, etc., for my kids to help us deal with a dad who's in Alaska and a mother who's getting immunotherapy and kids who need to eat and need to get back and forth from place to place. So thank you all for that. You all really are family to me, and I can't wait. Well, I don't want to say that, but I'm excited for the day when I can move back to Indiana. So thank you.
And we will welcome you with open arms. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, our next luncheon, December 18th. Come back. We have Charles Evans, the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. So don't miss that. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.